Good morning, everyone, and welcome to today's episode of SCEP Live Online, a production of University of Hawaii Presents, based at the University of Hawaii at Manoa Outreach College. I'd like to thank our sponsors, the Hawaii State Foundation on Culture and the Arts, the National Endowment for the Arts, the University of Hawaii, and Kaunoa Senior Services. We're excited to have you join us this week, and we love to stay in touch. So give us comments and questions through today's chat window and let us know what you're thinking. Also, if you send your email to csinfo@hawaii.edu, that's CSINFO at hawaii.edu, you'll get notices about upcoming programs. We're excited to have with us today and tomorrow Dave Del Rocco. Dave was born and raised in New Jersey, but after 40 years has come to call Hawaii home. He left a good job as a flight attendant to go back to school for a master's degree in library and information sciences. And although he had a bachelor's degree in Spanish from Rutgers, he had a strong desire to learn Hawaiian. The result was a long career as a librarian with the Hawaii State Public Library System, and then for the past 13 years as a teacher at Punahou School. And along the way, he became fluent in Hawaiian and an excellent storyteller. So, let's welcome to SCEP Live Online, Dave Del Rocco.
Thank you so much, Tim. What a nice intro. I would like to thank Tim and the University of Hawaii's statewide cultural extension program for inviting me, and also Kauna Senior Center on Maui for helping to sponsor this program. I've been storytelling for 31 years now, and as I have mentioned to Tim, doing it this way is really unusual for me. I'm used to being a lot more animated, I guess. But stories are still stories, and this is a really good format to be able to reach people in other places. So what I'd like to say is, what I tell kids when I do storytelling for kids is, storytelling is all about using your imagination. So be a kid again if you're an adult, and there are a variety of stories that I'm going to be sharing. And because we live in Hawaii, I like to start and end in Hawaii, but we will visit a few other places in the meantime. And my very first story actually is set in Hawaii. And I wanted to also mention that if you decide to tune in tomorrow, it's an entirely different set of stories. And also, because there are 8 major islands, I was able to find stories that take place in all 8 of the major islands. And today we have Hawaii Island, Molokai, and a final story, which is Maui and Lanai. Tomorrow, there's an Oahu story, a Ni'ihau and Kauai story. So please tune in tomorrow as well. So our first story takes place on the Kona coast of Hawaii Island, and it's about Kalaipuni. Kalaipuni was a chief. Now, an alternate title maybe for this story would be The Boaster That No Man Could Kill, because Kalaipuni was a boaster and he bragged about everything. He was very strong and he knew it. When he was a child, he was the strongest boy in his village. He could beat all the other boys in any game, whether it was about strength or speed or balance, whatever. He was the best and he knew it. As he grew, he became a very powerful chief, and other chiefs were a little concerned about him. He had everything going for him except modesty. Kalaipuni used to boast, "I can beat any man. No man will ever kill me. I'm afraid of nothing," etc. That was the type of chief he was. One chief was especially concerned about him. He knew that a chief like Kalaipuni would eventually want to take over other people's land and resources. And how would he stop him? Well, the best way would be to make sure that he was killed. But how would he do that? Well, he knew that he could play on Kalaipuni's big ego, and he would offer him a challenge. This challenge would be to battle all the sharks that lived out in the deep ocean off their coast. What this chief also knew was that if Kalaipuni went out that far and got involved in a shark fight, the strong currents would eventually take him away to the island of Kaho'olawe, and he would not be able to get back to Hawaii Island. He also figured that he should find a way to have him killed on Kaho'olawe and never return to Hawaii Island. So he sent a messenger on a canoe to reach Kaho'olawe. And at that time, there was only an elderly couple living on that island. It's a very barren island. It didn't have much water and did not accommodate much life. This elderly couple was told that in a few days, a very bedraggled looking chief would climb out of the ocean onto their island, and their orders were to kill him. So sure enough, Kalaipuni took the bait. When he was told, your challenge is to swim out to the deep, deep ocean and battle all the sharks, Kalaipuni certainly knew he could do that. He swam out quite far, and when he reached where the sharks were, he started battling the sharks. He beat all the sharks. It was exhausting, but he did make good on his promise. He was able to battle all the sharks and win. However, he also drifted away. When he tried to swim back to Hawaii Island, he was not able to. And just as predicted, he drifted all the way to Kaho'olawe. And when he climbed out of the water, he'd been in the ocean for a few days. He was exhausted. He was extremely thirsty. And he saw this elderly couple. He roared at them, "Give me water, I'm parched." Now, this elderly couple had dug a pit in the earth and filled it with water. They didn't have much, but they knew he would be requiring water when he came off of the ocean like this. They also saw it as their opportunity, possibly, to kill him. When Kalaipuni bent down to drink from the water, the elderly couple had gathered all these stones and rocks and began pelting him with them, hoping that would kill him. All it did was enrage him. He stopped drinking and he roared, and they knew he was going to go after them. The husband said, we must quickly go hide. He's going to kill us. The wife, she was pretty tough. She said, "We don't need to hide from this one. I'll take care of this." She looked around and found the biggest rock she could handle, and she threw it at his head, and it killed him immediately. And therefore, Kalaipuni made true on his boast that no man would ever kill him. And that is a story of female empowerment from Hawaii Island, the boaster no man could kill. So we're going to take a little trip now to the east coast of the United States. This is a Native American tale called The First Strawberries, told by the Cherokee people. And imagine in the old days, there were a lot of things that exist now that did not exist then. In the ancient days, the Creator made a young man and a young woman, and he created them at the same time so that they could live together and so that they wouldn't be alone. They loved each other very much. But as will happen sometimes with a couple, once in a while there could be a disagreement. What happened was the husband had gone out hunting. He was very tired and very hungry when he came home. He had thought his wife would have made some food for them. What did he see when he got home? She was just picking flowers. She was picking flowers because they were beautiful, and she wanted to share their beauty with her husband. But he was not appreciative of this at all, and he began to scold her for having nothing available for him when he was so tired and hungry. And so she was very upset. She said, "Your words are so hurtful to me. I can no longer live with you." And she stormed off. Pretty much immediately, he regretted how mean he was to her. Now, he was looking very sad and watching her go away as quickly as she could. And the sun had been shining brightly that day. The sun saw him, saw what had happened, and wanted to help. The sun asked him, "Can I help you? Are you really sad about how mean you were to your wife? If so, I can help you." And he said, "I'm very sorry. I already miss her. I hope she will come back soon. I really regret being mean to her." And the sun said, "I will definitely be able to help you." And the sun sent down a ray of sunshine to touch the ground near the feet of the woman as she was walking away fast. And there grew blueberries, beautiful blue, deep blue blueberries. Although she'd never seen blueberries before, she was still very angry, and she kept walking. She ignored them. The sun thought, I think I need to try a little bit harder. And he sent down another ray of sunshine to touch the ground where she was walking. And right by her feet grew beautiful, shiny blackberries. Again, something new, but her anger made her keep walking. The sun thought, I need to try again. And the sun tried a third time, sent down a sunbeam to touch the ground by her feet, and there some pretty raspberries grew. The woman paused a little bit, but didn't really stop. She kept on going. By now, her husband was following her, although she was quite far ahead. The sun thought, I must try my hardest. So he sent down a really strong ray of sunshine to touch the ground near her feet, and there grew strawberries. Beautiful, bright red strawberries. The woman stopped. They looked so delicious. She picked one and ate it. It was very sweet. She ate a few more. She forgot all about how upset she was, and she decided she would pick strawberries and share them with her husband. When he finally caught up to her, she offered him one of the strawberries. It was very sweet. It reminded them of how sweet their life was together before they had quarreled. And they went back home, and they lived happily ever after. And the Cherokee people say that when they eat strawberries, it reminds them to always be kind to each other. And that's the story of how the first strawberries came to being. And now we will move on to a Jewish folktale, which is called Too Much Noise. And this is a pretty well-known story. You may have heard it or versions of it. It is told throughout the Jewish communities in different parts of the world. And in this one, we have a farmer who lived with his wife and their young children and several older relatives. It was a very full house. And as you can imagine, with a lot of people in the house, there was a lot of noise. There was the laughing and giggling of the children. There was quarreling sometimes among the adults. There was just a lot of commotion all the time. The farmer didn't like it. He felt like he could get no peace from his noisy family. Now, there was in his village a wise man. And so one day the farmer decided to visit this wise man and tell him, I am so disturbed by my noisy family. What do you think I can do? And the wise man said, you are a farmer. I imagine you must have some chickens. And the farmer said, yes, I do. I do have some chickens. And so the wise man said, good. I'd like you to bring, about 4 chickens into your house to live with you. And in a week, you come back and see me. And so the farmer did what he was told. He thought it was unusual advice, but he went home and he took in 4 chickens into the house. And immediately, things were worse. In addition to the noise of his family, there was all the squawking of the chickens. But not only that, the chickens dropped feathers everywhere. Sometimes they pooped, which was really unpleasant. And sometimes he'd find eggs laid in the house in places he didn't expect. It didn't help the noise at all. It made things worse. After a week, he went back to see the wise man, and he said, it's not any better. In fact, it's worse. And the wise man said, well, here's what you must do. You do have some goats, don't you? And he said, well, I do. I have 2 goats. He said, yes, bring the goats into the house to live with you as well, and then come see me in another week. Well, the farmer thought this was peculiar, but he did as he was told. He went home and he brought the 2 goats into the house. Goats can be very sweet animals, but they're also very smelly, so there was that. Their doo-doo was bigger than the chicken doo-doo, and the goats also had their own noise. They make a kind of noise, and so now they were dealing with, in addition to his family and the chickens, there was also the goats. The farmer was very upset, and after a week, he went back to see the wise man. The wise man said, "Here's what you need to do now. I'm sure you must have some pigs, right?" And he said, "Well, yes, I do. I have 2 pigs." And he said, "Good. Bring the pigs into the house and come see me in a week." Well, as you can imagine, the farmer was pretty disturbed with this, but he wanted to see what would happen. And so he followed his advice and he went home and he brought the pigs into the house as well. Now it was getting really crowded. In addition to the family, there were chickens and goats and pigs. And the pigs were so noisy with all their oinking and snorting. And it was just terrible. After a week, he could barely stand it anymore. He went back to the wise man and he said, "This is not working. It's worse than ever." And the wise man said, "I believe I have the answer for your problem. You must have cattle. You do have some cows in your farm, do you not?" And he said, "Well, I do. I have 2 cows," but he knew where this was going. And sure enough, the wise man said, "Please bring the 2 cows into your house to live with you, and in a week, come back and see me." And so he did. And it was the worst ever. The cows were such huge animals. There was barely any room in the house. The cows were mooing, the pigs were oinking, the goats were smelly and bleeding, and then the chickens were squawking, and there was feathers everywhere. And when the cows made poop, oh, it was the worst ever. It was horrible. After a week of this, he went back to see the wise man with tears in his eyes, and he said, "I can't live like this anymore. Please help me." The wise man told him, "Here's what you need to do. Go back to your house and take the cows out, take the pigs out, take the goats out, take the chickens out, and then come back and see me." And so, very happily, he took all the animals out, put them back out in the farm where they belonged, and went back as quickly as he could to see the wise man. And he said, "Oh, it is so wonderful. All I hear now is the sounds of my beautiful family. Thank you, thank you, thank you." And that was how the wise man helped him with too much noise. So we will now move on to a part of the world, East Asia, where we have a Korean folk tale. And this one, although it's a Korean folk tale, it's called The Chinese Mirror. Now, why would it be called that? Well, in ancient days in Korea, no one had ever seen a mirror before. Now, of course, when you look in a mirror, what do you see? You see yourself, which is super important to remember in this tale. There was a young man who lived in Korea. He had a beautiful young wife. He had a little boy, and his parents were elderly and lived with the couple as well. One day, he made a journey to China. While he was there, he visited a shop, and in the shop, there was a shiny round object that he had never seen before. He picked it up and looked at it. A man's face looked back at him. He smiled, and the man smiled back. He stuck his tongue out, and sure enough, the man stuck his tongue out at him. He thought to himself, "This is magic. I must buy this." So he bought the mirror, but when he got back home to Korea, he thought to himself, "I'm afraid if others see this and know about it, it might lose its magic." And so what he did was he decided to put it inside a trunk in their living room. And when he assumed no one was around, he would go into the living room, open up the trunk, take a look inside, and smile or stick his tongue out or make a face or whatever. And this man in the trunk did the same thing. And then he would close the trunk and go away. But he tried to do it when nobody was around. However, he was noticed by his wife. She thought to himself, ever since he came home from China, he has been acting strangely. Every once in a while, he goes to this trunk, opens it up, and he smiles, and sometimes he laughs, and then he quietly goes away. I need to see what he's keeping in that trunk. And so, when no one else was around, or she thought, She went into the living room, opened the trunk, and looked inside. And there, what she saw was a beautiful young woman. And she said, "Oh, my husband, that terrible man, he brought back a beautiful young bride from China, and he keeps her in this trunk." And she began crying. Now, she didn't realize that her mother-in-law, the young man's mother, was nearby and heard this. She came in and she said, "Why are you crying, my dear?" And she said, "My husband, your son, he has brought back a beautiful young bride from China, and he keeps her in this trunk. Have a look for yourself." And of course, when the old lady looked at it, what did she see? She just saw an old lady, and she started laughing. She said, "I know my son is not very bright, but he wouldn't bring back an old lady." Well, they kept looking, and when they took turns, the young beautiful wife saw a beautiful bride from China, and the old lady saw an old lady. They kept arguing back and forth. This caused the father-in-law to come in. He said, "What are you two arguing about? What's going on?" And they said, "See for yourself." And the bride, the young wife, said, "Your son has brought a beautiful young bride, and he keeps her in this trunk." And the old lady said, "No, it's an old lady. That's what I can see in this trunk." So the father, an elderly man, opens up the trunk and looks in, and what does he see? He just starts laughing. He said, "You two are silly. That's not a woman, either young or old. All I see is our neighbor with his old bald head." Well, they kept arguing about who was actually in the trunk. Eventually, they left the room, but of course, the little boy heard all of this, and he was quite curious. What was all this commotion going on, and why were the adults all clustered around this trunk, and they were all arguing? There must be something really special in it. So when they were not in the room, he went in, opened up the trunk, and pulled out the mirror and took it with him outside to sit on the curb. He had the mirror in one hand, and in his other hand, he had his favorite pebble. And when the little boy looked in the mirror, what did he see? A little boy holding his favorite pebble. And he said, "That mean boy, he stole my pebble." Well, just then, the neighbor, another old man with a bald head, happened to walk by, and he asked, "Why are you crying?" And he said, "This mean boy, he stole my pebble." And when the neighbor looked in and saw a full-grown man, he said, "You bully! How dare you hurt little children?" And he took his fist and he smashed the mirror as hard as he could. And that was the end of the bully, the end of the little boy who stole pebbles, the end of the old man with the bald head, the end of the old lady, and the end of the beautiful young bride from China. And that's the story of the Chinese mirror. I hope you will not mind. I need to take a quick sip of water before we move on to what is known as a cautionary tale. This one is actually a more modern tale. It's American, and it's called Long, Long Nails, Red, Red Lips. This is a fun story to tell when you have children around. I don't know if any of you listening are children, but it's a cautionary tale because when you're at home and when you're old enough to stay by yourself, if someone knocks on the door and you don't know who it is, you're never supposed to answer the door. Every child is taught that. Excuse me. Okay, better. Now, this story is about a young girl named Amy, and Amy, as she was getting older, told her parents she was certainly old enough to stay at home by herself when her parents went out. And what did they tell her? "Amy, be sure that you don't open the door for anyone." And Amy said, "I promise I won't." And the parents went out. Excuse me. But Amy must have forgotten what they told her because she was at home and she heard a knock on the door. And did she open it? She certainly did. And there was a very scary looking lady. She had long, scraggly hair and long, long fingernails and bright red lips. And the lady leaned in towards Amy and said, "Do you want to see what I can do with my long, long nails and my red, red lips?" And Amy said, "No," and she slammed the door in her face. Well, you would think she would learn her lesson, but no. The next time her parents were out and Amy was at home by herself, again, she heard a knock on the door. And again, she opened it. There was that same lady. And she asked Amy, "Do you want to see what I can do with my long, long nails and my red, red lips?" And Amy said, "No," and she slammed the door in her face. But Amy did not learn her lesson. The next time her parents went out, the same thing happened. She heard and opened the door, and there was that same scary lady. "Do you want to see what I can do with my long, long nails and my red, red lips?" And Amy said, "No," and she slammed the door again. Apparently, Amy had a short memory because the fourth time her parents went out and left her alone, again, she heard a knock on the door. And she opened the door, and there was that really scary lady. And she leaned really closely to Amy and said, "Now do you want to see what I can do with my long, long nails and my red, red lips?" And Amy said, "What? What is it?" And the lady leaned in really close and went, and that's the story of the long, long nails and the red, red lips. Again, very effective if you have young children that you can really scare with that story. So that's a cautionary American tale. I would like to come back to Hawaii and share with you a story I heard many, many years ago on the island of Molokai. One thing about Hawaiian folktales or legends is that there are very many versions of them. And so you may hear a different version of this story and you may say, "Oh, I heard it differently." But that's because these stories are quite old and they're told through generations and generations, and stories do change sometimes. In this case, what you should also know is a Hawaiian word called kupua. Not kupuna, which is elderly or ancestors, but kupua, K-U-P-U-A. If you're not familiar with that word, it is sometimes translated as a shapeshifter or a shape changer. Some people call it a demigod. In any case, it is a being that is somewhat supernatural. And some of them are fine and not scary, but some of them are very dangerous. The most famous one probably that we hear about on this island is Kamapua. Kamapua could be a pig. He could be a humuhumunukunukuapua'a. He could be a form of grass called kukaipua'a, or he could appear as a handsome man. These are all different forms that the kupua could take. Now, in this story, set on the island of Molokai, there was a beautiful young woman who lived with her parents. And in this small village, everyone knew everyone else, as was typical in those days. One day, a stranger showed up. No one knew anything about this man. He was a handsome young man, very charming, and mysterious because nobody knew anything about him. They didn't know where he had come from. They also never knew where he was living on their island. But because of his good looks and his charm, and because this young woman was very beautiful and charming as well, the two fell in love. And after a while, the parents were concerned about their daughter because they noticed ever since she had met this stranger, this handsome young man, she seemed to be getting sickly. She was weak all the time. She just seemed like somebody was sucking all the energy out of her. And this was not like her. They were quite concerned. Something else odd was that this handsome young man would show up in the evening, and by nightfall, he would just disappear. He would leave their village quickly, and nobody knew where he went, and nobody ever saw him in the daytime. Well, in those days, of course, there were no doctors, but there were certain experts called kahuna, and the elderly couple were so concerned about their daughter that they went to their kahuna and they explained, ever since this stranger showed up and ever since she and he have fallen in love, she has been getting very sickly and weak. She has no energy. Every day she seems worse. The kahuna told them, your daughter has fallen in love with a kupua, and you need to find out what this person's shape or true nature is. But in order to save your daughter, you must also kill the creature, whatever it is. That is the only way, because he is draining all of her energy. Well, they were quite concerned. They didn't know what they should do. They certainly didn't want to just kill the young man. And also, when he left in quite a hurry every evening. And they didn't want to follow him because they knew he would be aware of it. So they had a plan that they would wait until he fell asleep one evening, and then they attached little pieces of kapa, or cloth, onto the malo he was wearing, his loincloth. And then, when he left that evening, the little pieces of cloth stuck onto the branches and bushes that he walked by. And therefore, they could follow him at a safe pace behind by following where all the little pieces of cloth were snagged on the branches. And they followed him, and by now, it was very early in the morning, and they reached a clearing, and the young man did not see them, luckily. He lay down in the middle of this clearing, and as the sun was rising, the parents watched in horror. The young man's body turned into an enormous caterpillar. That was what their daughter had fallen in love with, a caterpillar. That was the type of kupua. They waited until it stopped moving and they realized it was completely asleep. But how do you kill a 6-foot caterpillar? They couldn't step on it. It was much too large. They thought about drowning it, but they would have to drag it all the way to the ocean. That was not going to happen either. It was much too heavy and much too big. They thought about cutting it into pieces, but that would wake it up and it would fight them. Finally, they decided they would burn it. They covered up the body of the caterpillar with all the leaves and twigs and branches they could find, and they set fire to it. And they expected that it would just burn up like that. But instead of it burning in the fire, it exploded. And in place of this enormous caterpillar, there on the ground were thousands of little caterpillars crawling all around. Well, they did save their daughter from the caterpillar. But from that day till now, that part of Molokai has had lots of little caterpillars. And because of that, this place is known as Pu'u Pe'elua. Pe'elua is one of the many words in Hawaiian for caterpillar, and Pu'u is simply hill. And so this place on Molokai, near Ho'olehua, kind of near the airport actually, is known as Pu'u Pe'elua because of that story. If you travel to Hawaii Island, there's a similar version and a similar hill called Pu'u Enuhe. Enuhe is yet another word for a caterpillar in Hawaiian. Kind of an eerie story, but very typical of traditional Hawaiian stories, again, because of Kupua. Now, a lot of Hawaiian stories are big on trickster tales. And my final story will take us to the island of Maui, as well as Lanai. And it's about a boy who knows how to be a trickster. Now, sit back and relax. This will be the longest story. And it starts on the island of Maui. There's a boy named Kaulu. Kaulu was quite a rascal boy. And he was also the chief's son. Now, maybe because he was the chief's son, he thought he could get away with a lot of bad behavior and not get punished. But he was very rascal, very kolohe. But one day he went too far. The chief had ordered his men to plant ulu, or breadfruit. And they planted it in this space that was Kaulu's favorite space to play. He played many games in this area. He thought of it as his area. He was so angry that ulu plants or breadfruit had been planted there. And when the chief's men were finished with all their hard work, what did he do? He went over to that area and he tore out all the plants. When the chief heard this, he didn't know initially that it was his son who had done it. He said, whoever has destroyed the breadfruit plants will be banished to the island of Lanai. Now, in those days, Lanai was said to be inhabited by very ancient spirits. These were not ghosts as we hear them in Western stories, maybe people who had died and were still in the area, but no, these were spirits who lived on the land always, but they were considered very dangerous. And at that time, no one lived on Lanai and no one even visited for fear that these ghosts would probably eat you because there was nothing there. When it was discovered that the chief's own son had destroyed all the ulu, ironically, the very plant he was named for, the chief did not change his mind. He said, no, even though he is my son, he must accept the punishment. He will be banished to the island of Lanai. He will leave tomorrow. Ka'ulu's mother, the wife of the chief, begged him not to do this. He will die there. The spirits will surely kill him. But the chief could not be swayed. He said, my son is so clever, maybe he will find a way to outsmart those spirits. The next morning, when he was going to set out for Lanai in his canoe, his mother gave him seedlings for plants that he could plant over there because she knew there was really nothing for him there. One was ulu, or breadfruit, the same plant that had gotten him in trouble. The other was kalo, or taro, the most basic Hawaiian food. She was so worried about him, but Ka'ulu said, don't worry, I will be fine. In fact, I think I can get rid of all the spirits on that island, and when I do, I will light a fire on the shores of Lanai, and across the way on Maui, you will be able to see the fire, and you know that I am okay, and that I have gotten rid of all the spirits. And so he left. When he reached Lanai, the spirits were there to meet him. Although they did not eat him or harm him in any way, they were curious about him. They said, stranger, you have never been to our island before. Where will you sleep tonight? Ka'ulu knew that probably they were going to wait until he went to sleep that night and then kill him and eat him. So he looked around and he said, I think I will sleep in those bushes over there. He saw some bushes nearby that looked like possibly a good soft place to lie down. So the spirits kept that in mind. In the meantime, Ka'ulu started planting his ulu, his breadfruit. Now, the spirits didn't know what that was. They'd never seen it before. And they asked him, stranger, what are you doing? What are you planting? And Ka'ulu said, this is breadfruit. It's a very delicious plant. And the spirits told him, but this is our island. This is our breadfruit then. But Ka'ulu said, oh, no. Only those who work for the breadfruit may share the breadfruit. And therefore, you must work with me in order to share this food. Well, the spirits didn't like that at all. But they did as they were told. One of them grumbled to their chief, we should just kill him off now. But the chief said, no, we will wait till he sleeps tonight. Then we will kill him and eat him. In the meantime, we will also be helping to plant all this breadfruit, and we will have all this food to ourselves. That night, when Ka'ulu went to sleep, he didn't go sleeping in the bushes as he had said. What he had done instead was he looked around upland and found a small cave that looked nice and clean and comfortable, and that's where he slept that night. As he slept, he heard howling noises and a lot of ooch and ouch as the spirits were wandering through the bushes, which were full of thorns, and getting snagged on them, looking for him. Of course, they never found him. In the morning, they met him again, and they said, "Stranger, did you sleep well last night?" He said, "I did, but I heard some funny noises. Maybe it was the wind in the trees, maybe it was some birds." He knew it was the spirits. They only glared at him. Now they saw him doing something else. He was planting kalo, his other plant. The spirits asked him what he was doing, and he said, "I'm planting kalo. It is very delicious, but it's a lot of work." The spirits told him, "Well, this is our island, so that is our kalo." But Kaulu said, "Oh no, only those who work for the kalo may share the kalo." And he said, "You can help me, and then you can share in this." And so all day in the hot sun, he put the spirits to work. And they grumbled to themselves, "He's making us do all this hard work." But again, the chief said, "This is good. We will now have breadfruit and taro. Tonight, when he sleeps, we can kill him and eat him, and we'll still have breadfruit and taro." So before he left, they asked him, "Stranger, where will you sleep this evening?" And Kaulu looked around, saw a cave nearby, not his cave, but a different one. And he said, "You see that cave there? I think I'll sleep there tonight." And that night, when he went to his own cave to go to sleep, he heard again howling noises and much splashing. He knew that the spirits were in the cave, the other cave, near the ocean, looking for him. Of course, they never found him. The next morning, when they saw him, they said, "Stranger, did you sleep well last night?" He said, "Yes, but I heard funny splashing noises. I wonder if I could have been hearing fish." The spirits just glared at him. Now, they saw him doing something very different. He was taking fairly large rocks, bringing them down to the ocean, and building something out into the ocean. They asked him what he was doing. He said, "I am making a fish pond. And when it is done, there will be plenty of fish." And of course, the spirits told him, "But this is our island, so that is our fish." And Kaulu said, "Oh no, only those who work to build the fish pond may share the fish. So now let's all get to work." And so he put them to work all day, hauling heavy stones down to the ocean until the fish pond was complete. Again, they grumbled, and the chief said, "No, we will wait." But they didn't find him that night either. And the next day, when they saw him, they didn't even ask about where he might sleep or where he was going that night, because they saw him doing something else. And they were quite curious. Kaulu said, "In order to have these plants grow really well and to be very healthy, we need to bring fresh water from the uplands. So we need to dig some irrigation streams. It's a lot of work." Now, the spirits were used to him putting them to work, and they asked him, "How long will this take?" Kaulu said, "If we start today, I believe we can finish in about 3 months. In 3 months! The spirits were terrified at all this extra work. Kaulu said, "Yes, let's get to work right now," and he began digging. In just a few minutes, he heard splash, 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 splash. And he looked up and he saw all of the spirits had jumped into the ocean and were swimming away from the island of Lanai as fast as they could. He had scared them away with hard work. That night, as he had promised his mother, he set a fire on the shores of Lanai to let her know that he was okay and that he had cleared the island of all the spirits. And from that time on, people could visit Lanai and could even live there and not be worried about these evil, evil spirits. And that story is sometimes called the weary, tired spirits of Lanai. I guess that was the last of my stories that I wanted to share, but I also would like to see if there are any questions from anyone.
All right. Thank you, Dave.
Thank
That was a
you.
beautiful story. I love that one. What kind of led you into storytelling?
Well, actually, good question. I was hired as a children's librarian at the Hawaiʻi Library in 1990, so a very long time ago. And that's when I started storytelling. I realized I enjoyed picking up a book and reading it to kids, and that was fun. I loved their reactions. But I also realized it was a lot of fun telling stories to them and just making them use their imagination. And sometimes I would even get a better reaction. That last story is quite long, and I probably would only use that with older children because younger kids would lose interest
Mm.
with longer stories. But but they do like the American one, the long nails.
Yeah, yeah.
That one's a popular one with young kids. And again, because I don't know who is in the audience, there could be young children, there could be adults, there could be any ages. But I think all of them are appropriate for any age. And I also had hired storytellers through the statewide cultural extension program to come to our library and share stories. And I got to watch professional storytellers, and I got tips that way. I
Mm.
also did some storytelling workshops that I went to, and then eventually ended up running workshops on American Samoa for people there.
Oh, wonderful.
Yeah, it was a really exciting experience, and you know, like anything, the more you do storytelling, the easier it
Right.
gets, and the more you have to learn because you have to learn a lot of new stories. So, as I mentioned, if you saw me last May, none of these stories were told last May, and tomorrow I have all new stories. I did think about adding one from last year just to fill in more time, but I didn't know how Tim would feel about that.
Oh,
So
that's
I thought I'd see, if you wanted one more or if you felt like we should see if there were questions.
okay. Well, today was wonderful. You captured the interest of everybody throughout, and such a wide variety of wonderful stories. I want to thank you for participating today, and we're going to look forward to tomorrow for new stories. But I want to take a moment and thank our sponsors once again: the National Endowment for the Arts, the Hawaii State Foundational Culture and the Arts, the University of Hawaii, and Kainoa Senior Services, and you, our audiences, for coming by and checking our programming out. Such wonderful programming as storytellers as Dave Del Rocco here. And let me remind you, yes, Dave will be back tomorrow at 10 a.m. at this same time, same channel. And then to let you know about the rest of the week, on Thursday, we have Professor Daniel Harris McCoy will continue his series of presentations on the classics with Sophocles and Society's Rejects. And then Friday, that's at 6:30 on Thursday. And then Friday at 7 p.m., we will be streaming from Orvis Auditorium, the Convergence Dance Theater. And that should be exciting as well. But we're all looking forward to tomorrow at 10 a.m. when Dave comes back. So thank you once again, Dave. And thank you all, audience and everyone. Please stay safe and aloha.
Aloha. Thank you.